just want to take a moment to look at how beautiful this cover is and how perfectly it represents the incredible story that you wrote. We're going to start off with a little reading, Nora.
Yes.
Okay, hand it over to her.
Yeah, so I'm actually just going to read the first chapter. The chapters aren't very long, so I'm just going to give you a little flavor, and then we'll talk about it and hopefully make you want to buy it. All right, so the outset is the clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness. John Muir. Chapter 1, Viv. Viv didn't notice anything unusual about the tree stand, not at first. The wind blew an early November chill through her body, and she wished for a moment she brought a jacket. She hadn't planned on staying up in the stand so long. Sighing, she pushed herself up from the knotted pine floorboards and rubbed the goosebumps beneath the sleeves of her Twisted Pines high school sweatshirt. The chill was nothing, really. All those motionless hours spent here with Aunt Elle every winter had lessened her skin's sensitivity to anything but the roughest cold. Still, this was the first icy wind of the season, and the first one, as Elle had always reminded her, bit the deepest. Viv's eyes flicked to the bench on the left side of the stand, half expecting to find Elle in her usual spot, but there was only a leaf. The wind swelled and the leaf skidded across the empty bench before sliding back down to the browning earth. Enough, Viv told herself. For the first time since arriving some hours before, she grabbed her compound bow from where it leaned in the corner and nocked an arrow. Although deer season was in full swing and she supplied several families' venison stores, she hadn't come to the forest to hunt. Today, as she'd done so often for the past several months, she'd come only for Elle. Even so, she should at least practice. Viv pulled an arrow back, letting the tip of her nose brush the bowstring as she sighted. Let your body steady. Slowly, she moved her index finger to the trigger, eyes locked on the poplar tree 30 yards away. Trust yourself. She heard the words so plainly in her mind, it was almost like Elle was there beside her again. Viv pulled the trigger. There was a soft whoosh, and then the arrow was buried in the target, probably 4 inches deep in the center. Viv smiled. She hadn't thought it would feel this way that first time she visited the stand after the funeral 3 months ago. She thought the space would seem vacant, and it did in the obvious way, but it also felt the opposite. Elle's steadiness lingered, her energy as tangible in the stand as the boards and nails. It had shocked Viv at first, the energy, because she thought she'd rid herself of that ability long ago. But somehow Elle had disarmed her, and since it was Elle, Viv didn't mind as much. Once Viv discovered Elle's energy, the realness of it and the comforting way it wrapped around her shoulders like a hug, she'd started visiting the stand regularly. Not to hunt. The season hadn't started when she'd first come back here. She went solely to feel better, to feel that she was okay, just as she was. She nocked a second arrow. These days, she needed that feeling more than she cared to admit. A familiar bark came from below. Viv lowered her bow and peered over the side of the stand. Hey, Snick. The tall terrier mutt didn't wag his tail in his usual playful greeting. Instead, he yapped again, a sharp, insistent sound. Viv frowned. A few more minutes, okay? Then we'll go, promise. The dog growled. Viv had never seen him act this way, and if she'd had hackles, they'd have raised as high as sticks. Later, Viv would wonder how her body had known, because instinct was the only thing that explained her next split-second moves, tossing her cherished $600 bow to the ground and diving for the wooden rungs hammered into the trunk, just as a series of small pops punctured the air. At the sounds, Viv didn't even think. She leapt the remaining 8 feet to the muddy ground. Something groaned, then cracked like ice breaking, and it took Viv a second to understand that the sounds came from the tree. Snick stood several yards away, barking furiously. Viv only made it a few steps before the air split with a whack. She looked back to see the massive tree dip sideways, groaning hideously. The ground shifted and opened, swallowing a good 3 feet of the trunk and surrounding earth like something out of a horror movie. The stand's planks arched and shattered. Shards of wood snapped and crashed against the earth. No! The sound barely escaped her lips before she sensed it, the hollowness echoing inside her bones. Elle's energy was gone.
I love that opening so much. I feel like it sets up the novel perfectly, and we get such a great sense of Viv from the very beginning. Her awesome energy and her connection to Elle, and the natural world around her. So to start things off, this is my first question: is where did the spark for your novel come from? Was it something like this scene that popped into your head first, or did it start with a character or something else?
Yeah, it's a really great question, because it took me a little bit of time to write this story because I was a little bit afraid of it, because it deals with an issue. I'm from rural West Virginia. The book deals with a lot of the plot centers around fracking, and that's a very divisive issue where I'm from. And I wanted to be able to portray both sides of the fracking issue in a real and authentic and sensitive way. And sometimes that can be challenging when you put books into the world, that are about really divisive things. And so what actually came to me first was I wanted to figure out, I knew I wanted to write about what was happening in the place where I was from, because it doesn't look the same. I grew up on 88 acres of rural wilderness, and now there's a huge pipeline that goes through part of that. And just like when I used to drive home, the landscape is just completely different. It's different from when I grew up, right? But a lot of jobs have been created because of that too. So there's just a lot of people with a lot of feelings about this. And so I wanted to find a way to write about that. And so really what came to me first were the characters. I knew there was this girl who loved the land, who I think that's a very rural thing. Like if you're from a rural place, land as identity is very much like a part of who you are. And so Viv is from, generations of West Virginians. She's lived there for a long time. And then I also wanted another character who really depended on pipelining. And so the character of Dex came to me, and what's happened to him is that he's the son of two veterans. His dad isn't around anymore, and you find out why in the book, but his mom has been struggling to provide for them. She's had to work 3 jobs in Pittsburgh, and they've just they're really on the borderline of poverty, when she finally gets a job working for the pipeline that actually gives them a pretty good life. And so she moves him here to rural West Virginia. And so Viv and Dex both formed into the story with like very strong ideas of what is like right and wrong and black and white, and especially today, I see so many people, they just shut down. They don't talk to anybody that thinks even a little bit differently from them. And I understand that sometimes that's, self-protection and things, but also if everyone does that, we can't move forward. We can't figure out solutions, right? So I wanted to figure out a way that these characters could come together and figure out that each of them are actually or maybe it is a slow burn romance, so you probably piece it together, but they start figuring out that they're not who each other one thought they were, right? And what they believe and so I hope it inspires a lot of thinking and a lot of questions and things like that. So that's what came to me first. And then I don't know if you're going to ask about the magical stuff, but that, yeah. Okay. What I'll just say right now is that Viv's ability to sense energy came with her character, with me. And then I tried very hard to not write the story that way. I was like, I write contemporary. I'm a contemporary writer. Even though I love reading fantasy and anything that has magic in it, but I was kind of like, what am I doing? Like what, but it was just, it was so much a part of her and the story that I felt, okay, no, I really have to, I need to like write it with it. And then it just flowed so much better. It was like, I was so blocked before when I was trying to write it without this. And then I could just tell by, it's not like it was easy to write, but it was easier than it had been, you know, as I was like, okay, this is gonna be part of her. I don't know what people are gonna think, like what's my agent gonna think, but it seemed to work.
Well, I think that's one of the most powerful things about the magic in this book, because it does feel just like an extension of feeling connected to the art. And so it feels very accessible for, I think, people who maybe wouldn't pick up a fantasy book, like especially a high fantasy book, but they would connect to something that, like earth magic, that just, it feels like any of us could feel something like that if you just took it a little bit further.
Yeah.
So I really loved that part of it. Going back to the characters, you write from two different perspectives, and they're two very different perspectives. Was it hard to get into like the mindset of each of those perspectives, like switching back and forth between Viv and Dex? Did you write like a bunch of Viv and then switch to Dex, or were you like going back and forth like in the book?
Yeah, so my first book, The Edge of Anything, is also dual narrative, and it goes back and forth between two characters. And so again, I really thought I was just going to write like a one perspective book. I tried very hard to do that, and it just didn't work. And so they are very different, but I wrote them back and forth. And I do think I like that part. It doubles everything that you have to do as a writer. You know, in terms of like how much you need to know about the characters and like their own arc. And, you know, you have to do everything twice, and then you have to make sure like the emotional arcs meet, and it's a lot more work. But I think for me it was worth it, and definitely in this book, because the idea is I wasn't trying to like preach anything in this book, and I hope, you know, I don't think it comes across that way, but like I didn't want to put like one perspective above the other, you know. And so if it was just told solely from one character's point of view, that could have happened. And I really wanted to get in, because there's other things that the characters are struggling with. It's not like just their thoughts on fracking. That would be very interesting. So, but yeah, it was a little bit, it was a little challenging to sometimes go back and forth, especially when I had to figure out, both of the characters come to realize, you know, that maybe they've been a bit rigid in their thinking. And I think, especially for the character that maybe I identify with a little more, you know, that was an interesting thing too, because it's something I have to confront about myself, and then think about how I've been challenged and changed, and then write that into the character. But then on both sides, but you have to do it differently because they're both, you know, they're different characters. But I definitely went back and forth, and I liked that because it kept me from getting like too one of them.
Yeah, like going back to what you were saying before, there is no right or wrong, straightforward, black and white answer.
Right, because we would have done it if we,
yeah,
you know,
there was
like,
one.
everyone would do it.
And even like coming into this book, you know, even I had my own like feelings about, you know, environmentalism and pipelines and fracking, but you're able to explore the concepts with the characters. And I just think that's really cool, especially for a teen novel, because these are young people exploring tough subjects that don't have a clear answer. And that can feel really hard, I feel like, when you're young, that there's not like a clear, like, right answer, wrong answer.
Yeah, or especially if it feels, I mean, to them, I mean, especially to Viv, you know, there is a clear answer to her, you know, and so it can really much feel like, and even today, even if we, even if you come down very hard on one side of an issue for valid reasons, that's fine, but you still have to work with other people for anything to happen. Because if you can't work with we've seen what happens, right? We just are in this terrible deadlocked place. And so hopefully teen readers who, I mean, any readers, but especially younger readers who are really not as jaded, I guess, as adults yet,
Yeah.
can maybe start thinking about these things and thinking that maybe they can interact differently, perhaps, with people who think differently.
Yeah. The characters are also really opposite in like their personality traits too, which I feel like made the slow burn romance like even more fun. Like it was very much opposites attract like thing. And Viv really sees herself as like this fighter, both like mentally and physically, whereas Dex is trying to be a fighter because of his dad's expectations, but really is finding like that's not his true essence.
Right.
What was it like writing those like did you know that they were going to be so opposite in their personalities initially, or did that just sort of like flow out of them debating these issues?
I figured it out before I got too far into the book. Like I figured out the characters pretty well, because once I kind of figured out some things that they were opposite on, I was like, well, maybe let's make them like really opposite. How can they be like completely opposite of each other in lots of other ways? And the thing about Dex too is that it's hard, I think in a lot of places, but certainly in rural West Virginia, it can be hard to not be like what people would consider like a manly man, you know, like, and there's stuff that goes with that, and there's baggage that Dex has from his own father that's going with that too. And then in the same kind of place, it can be very difficult for a woman to be a, you know, louder, independent, aggressive, you know, personality. So I was really interested, I've always been interested in gender stuff. And so I was just really interested in exploring those kind of dynamics within this particular setting, especially.
Yeah, it was really interesting just seeing, I mean, they're stereotypical gender norms swapped essentially. So it was cool to see those play out, how everyone reacts to them differently, like what would be a good personality trait, like being aggressive for a man is not true for Viv.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved how that played out with their romance. Did you like thinking about the romance along with all these other plot elements? Did you like use a beat sheet or anything for the romance? Did you like structure it, or did it just sort of like come out of the story you're already writing?
It didn't. I didn't use a beat sheet. I always tell myself I'm going to, and then it's like too mathematical, and I'm like, hey, my brain doesn't think like that, you know? So it's like I like to read about them, and then I like have that kind of in the back of my mind, but I don't like plot it out like that. I do plot out because I had to sell the book. I had to write a synopsis of what would happen. And so I did have to kind of figure out, okay, these are the major points that are going to happen. And so that's really valuable. And I didn't start my career as doing that. And that's one way that I've really changed as a writer, but it's so nice if you spend that time, those weeks, like figuring out, okay, what are actually going to be the major points. And I do that more so, I think, kind of at the same time, like what are the emotional points going to be, but also like what are kind of like the climactic, exciting parts of the plot going to be too. And then it's like a big puzzle, right? Like, you know, and then you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, if I have all these things, but then I have to shape them in a way that they can kind of all like lead up to each other and happen at the same time. And then hopefully, so this is why I do a lot of character work up front, is that when I'm writing, the choices that Dex makes and the choices that Viv makes, sometimes they're not great choices, but they fit with what those characters want, like what they want, what their external desire and what their internal desire is. So if you've ever had me teach you, you're gonna hear those things a lot. But if you can really kind of hammer out, like, okay, what are those things? And also like, what is the misbelief of the character, you know, that then has to be changed. If you have those things pretty solid in the beginning, like, I mean, not to say that you're not going to mess with it and it will change, because I definitely am not a kind of person that's like, chapter 1, this happened, chapter 2. It's not like that at all. It's more just kind of like a general sense, and then I can like be a little bit creative about it. But if you kind of know your characters well enough to know, okay, like this is where they want to be, this is where they need to be emotionally, and this is where, you know, by the end of the novel, then it's just about like how you get them there. And it's a little I don't think anything about writing is easy, but it's a little easier than I used to just like write in the dark, just be like, well, I don't know, here's what happens next, and then you get to the end of the
change them.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end of the draft and you're like, oh, that's a mess.
And not much happened.
Right. Yeah, not much happened. So it's a little quicker if you do that work.
That's great. Going back to the magic, because
Yes.
that's my favorite topic always. So I know you said that you were trying not to let the magic into this book, but it persisted, which I love. Did you have the same approach to writing the magic once you did accept it? Like, did you kind of have a structure for the magic ahead of time, or did it just like organically flow out of like Viv's character?
I think it was more organic. It wasn't as structured because at first I didn't quite know how the magic would work, and then I kind of figured it out as I was going along. And I definitely didn't know. I remember just being like, okay, I need to know like how, like what's the deal with the decks and the magic, like how is that gonna, like how's he gonna bring it out in her kind of thing. And then I'm figuring out, like it's so interesting, like I don't know, as a writer, like that's like the most juicy parts of it, where you're like, oh, I have to solve this mystery of the book, and then I can write it. But yeah, it was just more organic because of just and I could relate a lot with Viv as like how she feels about where she's from, and the beauty of that place is very much how I feel about where I'm from. And so it was just like I just like turned up the volume on it, essentially.
I think that's why it feels so like possible. Because it's like I feel so peaceful and happy when I'm in nature or in the mountains, especially in this like incredible setting where we live here in Asheville, North Carolina. That it was like, oh, just like you said, one step further, and I can feel like roots and like talk to the trees, and things like that. And so I think that just makes it so much more authentic and appealing to, especially to teen readers. Like I would have loved to have this book as a kid for sure. But I did notice some similarities with your short story and Absolutely Normal, and I was really curious to ask you about that. So you wrote a short story called Spidey Sense for your mental health anthology that you also co-edited with Rocky Callan. And the character in that short story also has like some is discovering magical abilities that are kind of similar to Viv's. Do these two stories exist in the same universe, or are they connected somehow? Like, how do you view these two pieces of writing?
So I never really thought about that before as do they exist in the same universe? In my mind, that short story, so I was working on that short story while I was also working on Fault Lines. And so I was testing to see whether this could work, so I was trying to be, and I've definitely told people before, like, if you read my short story Spidey Sense, and then you read Fault Lines, you'll probably see some things, that I was very clearly testing out. And in so Spidey Sense is like a bit nature based, but like that character, it's actually like she has OCD, and that difference in her brain is kind of like what allows her to have these like extra senses. So it's a bit different in how the magic works, but definitely I was testing the waters, and that short story is the first time I really kind of delved. I think it was more like, okay, can you do it, Nora? Can you write a story like this and resolve it and make it fit? And once I did, and I really, really liked that short story. I had such a fun time writing it, which they did for me, I think. Yes. And it was very helpful. Thank you. So once I had so much fun writing with that, I was like, okay, I can do this. I'm gonna go full in on the magic and Fault Lines.
Yeah, that's great. Sort of related to the magic, nature and the natural world in general, it almost to me felt like nature was a character in your book, and I was curious if you felt the same way about I don't know if like the trees specifically, or the mountain, or the land, or if you felt like in your mind that was like another character that you sort of had to explore in your book, or if it was just more of like an energy
Yeah.
that you tapped into through your characters?
So it's hard to almost know. It's almost not even like separate in my mind because I'm where I'm from, because I'm such like a place-based person. And I think even if you're not from a rural place, or just like what you said, like when you, I mean, it's scientifically proven, like forest bathing is good for you. It's like good for your mental health, you know, it's more creative, like, you know, going outside when you need a break, like helps you produce more, like helps you be more creative. And so there is science stuff happening. And so I think I just kind of tapped into that more, but people said that in my last book too, that like nature is a character, you know, like I think it's just like, that's part of how I write because it's part of who I am.
Yeah, it's kind of like your like, I don't know, trademark as an author.
I guess, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. It would be hard for me to write, like even if I wrote a story, I'm just trying to envision, like, even if I had to write like a space story or, you know, a story set in New York City, I still feel like it would be very much about the environment, whatever it was, would be very much like another character.
And the places you can find nature.
Yeah, and just like it would, like the way the characters interact with their space around them.
Yeah. So when you were actually writing Fault Lines, did you go out into nature a lot and write in nature, or like how did the nature around here like figure into your writing process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually looked at a lot of photos of where I grew up. We don't have that house and land anymore, which is sad, but I mean, you know, that's but I really like immersed myself in that world because that world is different from Asheville. However, the North Carolina mountains are very, you know, is very similar too. So definitely going on like hikes. I live, you know, near lots of wooded areas, just going, writing outside. I did a lot of, even at, we have a number of coffee shops that have like outdoor spaces that are close to trees, just writing there. Like sometimes I would, like, I remember this one day where I literally just like sat under a tree and I was like, look up at it and see like how the light came down through it, you know, like what birds I was hearing, like that kind of stuff, and just taking in all that sensory detail. And also just like how my skin was feeling, you know, like when you're outside. And so I definitely did try to immerse myself as much as possible. And I move around a lot when I write. Like I have a desk at home, but then, you know, I'll write in the kitchen or I'll go to a coffee shop. I don't just have like one space. And so that just helps me too.
Yeah, you can really feel that access to nature throughout all of your writing in this book. And we talked a little bit about West Virginia and its influence on your writing, but I was curious if you had more to say about some of the influence on the themes, the setting, which we've been talking about, and the fracking.
Yeah, so first of all, there just really aren't many YA books set in West Virginia. Like I was trying to find them, there's like I can count like on one hand basically, and like contemporary ones, I mean even less. So it was really important to me, just as an author, as someone who grew up in West Virginia, like I wanted to be a writer, you know, like I've always loved stories. And there was definitely a point, like really when I went to college, where I lost that for a little bit, where it was like, that's not a thing I can do. That's not practical. I have to, you know, I have to do something else. And it was important to me to set a story there to show that, like, especially teen readers, like that, yes, like, first of all, it's a state, because people all the time like don't even know it's a state. And the last person I told, you're gonna think I'm lying. I'm not lying. The last person that I told casually that I was from West Virginia, like asked me if I knew someone in Virginia Beach. And I was like, what? Like, that's not even, like, there's so many problems with that statement. Like how? So I was like, oh my gosh, I get so upset. Like my husband might remember this, but we've like written it on tickets before, like waiters and stuff. And we're like, West Virginia is its own state, just FYI. But and so first of all, it was just important for me to put a book out there And yeah, what was the rest of the question? I got off on my soapbox. No, I forget.
More just about how your background living in West Virginia influenced the specific themes.
Oh yeah, and then I very much like I grew up with this stuff. So so I was there in the time it was like pipelining wasn't there, and then all of a sudden it was. And so I remember like the differences. And that was something I really wanted to explore. And part of it was also like a way for me to process, kind of like a grieving process too. Because the land and the environment that existed when I was small, and when my sister and I would like create these fantastical universes, you know, in all these places, just isn't the same. It's very different. And so yeah, trying to process that and come to terms. And it was just really, really important for me to do that. Now, I think because of a lot of, there's just always crap about rural people in the media anyway, you know, and I just wanted to present hopefully a more authentic story than what we're often given.
Yeah, and I think you really do that with your roster of side characters as well. Not just the main characters. There's a lot of diversity in your side characters, which I really loved, like Maeve and Oscar, who are sort of the two best friends of Viv and Dex, respectively. And how do you think like these characters like challenge like ideas people might have about living in America?
Well, it's interesting because I thought I might get some pushback on that. Maybe I will, to because there is a lot of diversity, but I mean, even in predominantly white places, it doesn't mean there's no people of color.
Exactly.
Or, you know, no people that aren't completely straight. Like, that's just ludicrous. You know, they've always been there, and it's just erasure of the rural narrative, of that part of the rural narrative. And so it was really important for me to bring that out. So there's a character who works at the little diner in town. Like, she's based on like someone I know, you know, and it's just really interesting about how these sort of people are always like, well, how would these people get to the mountains, you know? And it's like, well, the same way anybody else gets to, you know, like. But yeah, so that was really important for me too, to just challenge, like, what is rural America? What is rural West Virginia specifically? And I'm also not trying to say that it doesn't have problems. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I'm just trying to show give a more authentic picture of maybe why some people there feel the way they do about certain very divisive issues, and if we're going to move forward together as a country, like, how do we need to connect with those people? Because we have to connect with those people, because if we don't, it'll just get worse, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, I love, and like diversity can also just like go beyond like people's identity into like the different thoughts people have about different subjects. So I think that's also really well covered in your book. Here's just a fun question. Do you have a favorite part of the book that you like? Is there like a memory of writing a part of the book, or slotting a puzzle piece in that gives you a lot of joy?
So a part that was really fun for me to write is kind of like the action sequence that happens at the fracking site, or at the pipelining site. I really liked that because I always knew that was going to happen. And so I write not everybody does this, but I write fairly linearly. And so when I got to that part, and it's, you know, kind of this climactic moment, it was just, you know, it's fast and punchy, and writing that and then revising it to make it even more like tense and fast and punchy, you know, that was just really fun. It was really joyful for me. And also it's kind of the moment where both characters are like, oh, maybe like maybe I made some mistakes, you know? And so that's really interesting. I like writing character, like that's just really fun too, when you've built a character a certain way and they're so entrenched in this worldview that they have. And then all of a sudden they like something happens and they just have to, they can't go back to how they were thinking before.
Yeah, that's
know?
such an exciting scene. I can imagine like if you're writing linearly, like working up to that scene and being really excited. It was very exciting to read as a reader.
Awesome.
I wanted to circle back to a little more magic, and then
Okay.
maybe we can move into some Q&A from the audience if there's any. So we talked a lot about Viv and her magic, but Dex also like has a moment or a couple moments with some of the natural magical things. So one of the moments is when he sees a white deer in the woods, and this is one of my favorite parts of the book. I just thought it was so beautiful, and I love how he really interrogates it later. He's like, when his friend Oscar mentions that, you know, this could be like a special thing that happened, and the white deer does have a lot of symbolism in like Celtic mythology and other cultures around the world. Did you do that purposefully to put this white deer in? And like, what's your thinking about what that means?
Well, so it was twofold. So first of all, we had a white deer on my property. Oh my gosh. I know. So I was like, the white deer has to be in the book because it's too awesome. And it was definitely a thing. Like you don't hunt the white deer. The white deer live free. And so when I was trying to find a way in, because Dex is, you know, he doesn't come from a rural space. Like his values are like he just thinks differently than Viv does. And so I needed a way for him to kind of start feeling a little bit of what she feels, but like it's different. But so yeah, so the white deer was very much and because it is so symbolic in many cultures, it just seemed like a really cool way that he could have this moment with nature and also with himself. And those scenes are interesting. I'm really glad you said that you liked it, because sometimes when you write scenes like that, but where it's just Dex, it's just him and his thoughts and the deer. So like it could have the potential to be like super boring, right? So it's like a pretty difficult job for an author to keep that interesting, to make it interesting. And so I'm glad that seemed to have worked.
Yeah, for sure. And then you followed it up with a scene where he's on a mountain and feeling really connected to the world around him in a way that is similar to what Viv's feeling. And that's sort of what leads him to believe her. Right. And I just thought that was also like so beautiful. And so I think we might open up for Q&A from our live audience and also our virtual audience at home. So if anybody here has a question first, we can take that. And if not, we'll go to the virtual audience.
We do have some questions from the home audience. Okay. So folks here in the store, put your thinking caps on. So our first question is from Gary, who says, the alternating perspectives in both fault lines and the edge of anything are really appealing and regularly used in young adult literature. Why do you think it works so well with young audiences? And are there any advantages or disadvantages in writing in that format? Thanks, and you're awesome.
Yay, thanks, Gary.
So the question, just so everyone can hear, was about dual POV and about how it's often used in YA fiction and what are some challenges with that format and why is it so appealing?
Yeah, so I like dual POV because I like to read it. Like as a reader, I think it's really interesting because I love getting in a character's head, but it's even cooler when you're in multiple characters' heads. And it's even cooler when those two are like, you know, butting heads, because then you get to see actually like what's going on and you can see how the same interaction was taken so differently. And I think that is really appealing to young people too, because, well, I mean, really to anyone though, like I know for me, I overanalyze things in my head constantly. Like I'll have an interaction and I'll be like, oh my God, was that weird? Like, was it fine? Like, what did that person think? Did I like say the wrong thing? Like, and so I love having access. It would be, you know, so cool if I could just like flip into their brain and be like, oh yeah, no, I thought it was totally normal. It's fine. Right? And so that's cool, right? That's, and I think too, as a young person, like you're so trying to find your sense of self, which we are always constantly, I think, trying to find our sense of self and always changing and growing, which is why YA, I think, appeals to adults too. But just, and in order to do that, you have to see the world through other people's eyes, see it differently. And I think that's why multiple POVs is so engaging. I think the really difficult part is, I mean, it's just double the work for the author. So like, I wouldn't recommend your first book being dual point of view. Now I have to say, just to point out that The Edge of Anything is my first published novel and it is dual point of view, but it is not my first novel that I ever wrote. So I wrote several warm-up novels, yes, to teach me how to write. So yeah, that answers it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Another question from here? Yes.
I love the title, and I'm wondering, how did you come up with it?
Oh, this is such a great question. So Carrie Macaulay came up with the title. She's one of my debut. She debuted in 2020 with me. She's another author. And so I was trying to figure out what to call this book. And so I was on a text chain with a group of authors. And so they were like, give us some words, like, you know, and so we were just kind of like all throwing words together about like, they knew what the book was about and stuff. And it was just like this long text chain of different titles. And then all of a sudden she was like, what about fault lines? And I was like, oh, what about fault lines? And then everyone was like, yeah, fault lines. And so I was like, okay, that's the title. So it wasn't me. Shout out to Carrie. Thank you.
That's like the ideal, like as an author, that's like the ideal situation to just have like a title generator.
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. It's so hard because I mean that at least you have in your control. Well, sometimes they make you change the title. That's out of your control. But like, and also the cover, which is also out of your control because you know that's an artist doing it, not you. So I feel like very lucky that with Cornelia with her cool cover. It's beautiful.
All right, we'll take maybe is there time for another question?
Gary has another question, but I'm gonna go to Mary first, since Gary already got a turn. And Mary's skipping ahead. She wants to know what you're both working on.
Ooh, excellent. So the question is, what are we both working on?
Oh my, okay. So I'm working on 3 things right now, which I don't recommend, but that's just how it happens. I have 2 anthologies out and I just sold another anthology, an environmental anthology. And so I'm working on editing those stories, which is super fun. And then I'm co-writing 2 middle grade books. I'm co-writing a middle grade fantasy and I'm co-writing a middle grade contemporary.
Lots of collaboration going on.
It's true. It's nice. I think like we work alone. It's so lonely. And I love collaborating with other. I think that's one of the things that doing anthologies really taught me is that I love to work with other people.
That's great.
Yeah.
I am just working on a magical middle grade at the moment, all by my lonesome. I think, we might have time for like 1 or 2 more questions.
So back to Gary, he's got actually 2 more good ones. So thank you, Gary. So the first question is, energy is such an important element in fault lines. What are the challenges in writing about a concept that is at least somewhat abstract?
Okay, so the question was about the energy in fault lines and what are the challenges of writing about a concept that's abstract, at least to some degree.
A lot. There's a lot of challenges. So I think you have to in some way make it tangible for the reader, and you have to do that usually through the character. So like, how does Viv experience the energy, like through her senses, like how does it feel in her body, but also like what thoughts does it make her have? and then figuring out exactly like, well, what is the energy, like where does it come from, even if that's like, even if there's not like a black and white answer in the book, just, you know, me as the author kind of figuring out that the way I have created the energy, the way when it happens, like when she can feel it, that all makes sense. And so I think that's the trickiest part.
The book has to have like an internal logic with the magic.
Exactly. So that like, even if like when you're in the experience, you don't know how it's happening, like by the end, you're like, oh, like, and then you could go back and you can see each time, like, oh, that fits with the pattern, you know.
Any more questions from our? Yes, I think there's one right here.
I was actually wondering, what is a beat sheet? You mentioned that when talking about slower.
Yeah, so the question is, what is a beat sheet?
Do you want to talk about what a beat sheet is?
Sure, I might not be an expert because I sometimes shy away from them, but basically novels are made up of specific beats that you want to hit, and in the romance world, they all sort of follow this similar structure that leads to the happily ever after. So you have to have like a low point before the couple gets back together. But you can use beat sheets for lots of different kinds of books, but it's just typically used in romance a lot.
I don't know if it was started by screenwriters.
I think it's a screenwriting term.
Because screenwriters are, I mean, it's very, to write a screenplay, like that's almost, it's formulaic, it's not the right word exactly, but I mean, like certain things have to happen, like page 20, this has happened, page 40, this has happened.
It's very prescriptive.
Yes,
way,
and so a number of people have transferred or, you know, taken that and been like, well, here's how you would do it in a novel. And people have lots of different ideas about it. So there's various, I mean, there's like an overall accepted, okay, this is like the beats that you have to hit, but then like people are like, there's a lot of differences in how you go about that, right. Maybe. And so, and then there's also different beats for different genres. So this isn't like a true romance, like rom-com romance that you would like those, like if you've read a bunch of those, most likely the beats will be very similar at the same places of each book. And that's on purpose. That's because the audience expects it and you have to fulfill the expectation. So it's not a negative thing. It's actually a good thing. So it's just one tool that helps the writer make sense out of chaos, honestly. And sometimes, I mean, for some people it's helpful, and for some people it can be too prescriptive, like, right, you know, it can make you feel a little suffocated. So yeah,
I think even though you didn't use a beat sheet, like you can still feel some of those beats come through, like when, you know, they might not be getting along or they're getting along. Right. Yeah, like I think they sometimes naturally will come out of the story that you're writing.
Right.
So
and cool. I think too, like once you've read enough books and especially once you start writing and you're writing, like you start to feel that, rhythm. Yeah. And so I think just like anything, the more experience you get, you know, you can do a little bit more of that on your own. But then, I mean, I don't know, every blank page is terrifying. So no
matter how much you've written before.
It's true. It's true. There's another.
Do you know if over time, if beat sheets have become more like commonplace, I suppose, in the writer's world, if a beat sheet or a synopsis is going to be more preferred by certain publishers, like I guess that might be individual as to who is reading the proposal.
Oh, like when you're selling a book.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question was about beat sheets versus synopsis, and if that would be preferred by a publisher when you're selling a book.
So I think that's pretty individual by like who's buying it. Most, I don't think you have to have like filled out a beat sheet. Like I think it's mostly just like a synopsis, and it'll be like they might say like, I want this told in 3 pages, or you can take 5 or 8, you know, like, so there might be, and if they want a 1-page synopsis, that's terrible. Like you have to, then you have to write like your 10-page synopsis, and then your 5-page synopsis, and then your 3-page synopsis, and then your 1-page synopsis.
Whittle it down,
right? But then you know so much about your book, so that's great too. But no, it just kind of depends on who you're working with.
Yeah, also I think the beat sheet is often like more of a process thing, like just for you.
Yeah,
or it
I
can
don't,
be,
it might, it might not make sense to other people. Like, they'll be like, this is a mess. You know, but you,
We have one more question.
Okay, great.
And just have time for that.
Perfect.
So the back matter of the book refers to sensitivity readers.
Hmm.
Could you just explain that a bit for folks who aren't familiar?
so the questions about sensitivity readers, and they are mentioned in the back matter of the book.
Yep. So, and I think my sensitivity readers, I don't know who they are because professional sensitivity readers are anonymous. Like, I got them through, I just asked my editorial team to find them. And so they are readers that identify in a certain way that they're reading for that, to make sure whatever that is specific. So like, for example, like I could be a sensitivity reader for like OCD, because that's what my first book is about. I have OCD, I live with that. So I can read a book and see if a character who has OCD in the book, if that feels authentic to me, and I can make, you know, I can just be like, oh, this really works, this doesn't, like maybe more of this. And so in this book, there is a character who is Mexican American, there is a character who is Black, and these are like main player characters. And there's a, I also did a sensitivity read for a queer rep too. And so just to make sure that I was, you know, portraying those characters as authentically as possible. And I mean, it's super, super helpful because you don't know what you don't know, and you know, you try to do your best. And I think to do due diligence, goodness, sorry, it's been a long day. You need to do that. And it's very different from asking your friends who already know you. You know, you can be like, oh, can you look at this? And your friend always like, oh, they know that you're not, you know, you're not trying to be insensitive, you're not trying. And so you can't, I mean, you can ask them to read it and they can give you some things, but like, you need to take it to the next level where there's somebody that's not caring about your feelings, you know, can read the book and tell you the truth.
Right, it's their job.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that brings us to the end of this amazing book launch. So congratulations, Nora.
Thank you.